Hi guys, it's TheLuchamediageek here again for the Burns Redo. This week we're doing Greg's choice, Greg Organda. We're doing the 1931 Fritz Lang classic, M. Now, M is a film, and I'm shocked to admit this. I, along with a lot of the other guys I'm sure on the channel, I'm an avid movie collector. I collect movies, and one of the terms that we have when we collect movies is some of the films you buy are what's called a shelfer. You buy it because it's a film you should have if you're in the movies and you're supposed to see, and you shelve it. I'm appalled to admit this. I got this film when it first got re-released on DVD in this edition, and I've had this DVD for about 6 years. Thanks to Greg, thanks to this, doing this channel was one of the reasons why I love doing this. I finally took it down and watched it, and I'm an idiot because I should have watched this film way sooner. It's a great movie. The plot is actually quite simple and incredibly disturbing for a film that was released in this era, that again being 1931. It's the story of a child murderer and the attempts by the police and the criminal underworld, the reasons why they get involved become more apparent later, to catch him. But with that, you also have the questions of personal responsibility. What crimes are so great that they don't rate a person's rights to the judicial process? All these questions are asked by this movie. The thing is, this is one of the first talkies, as they say. So whilst there is dialogue in the film, it's still mainly a visual movie, because let's face it, Fritz Lang was one of the filmmakers who was making the transition at this point from silent films to the audio medium. So whilst there isn't a huge amount of sound in the movie, there are big stretches actually where there's literally no sound, and I thought that was actually my audio on my DVD player failing, and it's not. The sound and dialogue that is there is used very effectively. For example, when you consider that this film doesn't actually have any kind of film score, the one tune that's used incredibly effectively is the tune in the Hall of the Mountain King, the whole which is, oh god, that was that tune, which is whistled by the killer as he approaches his next victim. Now let's just take a moment again to look at the subject of the movie. This is a film about child molestation, child killing. Whilst it never goes into the details of what happens to the children with such revelry as you've probably seen in a modern production, through Fritz Lang's brilliant use of imagery, the actions of the child killer are left very much in your own mind, and through just a few visual clues, it's not good. For example, when you're first introduced to Peter Lorre's child murderer, he is seen only in shadow, then you see him only from the back, and one of the things he does is he buys the girl a balloon. The balloon is then seen floating in the air, and it strikes some telephone wires. Now that doesn't seem like much in the way of suggesting what's happened to the audience, but when you see it, when you see the contrast of the delicate shape of the balloon and in contrast to these stark, harsh wires cutting across it, just from that visual signifier pretty much what's happened. And it's these visual clues that give the film its power. One of the other reasons why I love this movie, and that's why I'm fairly sure Greg will have chosen it, is the fact that it's almost like a precursor to modern crime thriller. One film I kept seeing in my head all while I was watching this is David Fincher's Zodiac, strangely enough. I know you could say it's because they're vaguely thematically similar, the hunt for a serial killer, which expands and affects the entire city, because what it is of course you have the police's efforts to capture the killer. But what the film I think does brilliantly is it shows the underworld. Basically, when we've got to catch him for moral reasons, and the fact that the police are really landing heavily on us, which is affecting our business. And I found that quite an interesting commentary on how an event like this, by Fritz Lang, on how an event such as this affects a modern urban environment. Everyone's affected. Again, as well, a comment done very well by David Fincher in his work. I really love this movie. I'm a sucker for 1930s architecture, so I found it really affecting, because I love that whole design. I'm gonna go slightly spoilers here. The killer is caught in an office block, which again is a beautiful example of 1930s design and architecture. That whole 1930s aesthetic. It had an architectural term which I can't remember at the moment, and it's just one of the things that this film really does well as well is a sense of movement. What you'll have is Fritz Lang wanted to show the interplay between how the police and the criminals themselves are trying to find the same person, the child murderer. And the way he shows that brilliantly is there'll be a sentence which is uttered by one group, and then the end of that sentence is uttered by the next as it jumps to the next scene. Sometimes audio actually bleeds over from jump cuts from one scene to the other, so it's this constant back and forth, which gives a film, and older movies do tend to be paced slower, but it does give the film a real momentum and a real effect. Another really great thing about the movie is the performance of Peter Lorre as the child murderer. Peter Lorre is, of course, the bug-eyed, creepy guy from many films. He actually plays one of the important characters in a film we looked at the previous weeks, which would be Casablanca. He played Ugarte, and this was his doorway into Hollywood. Now the thing is, his portrayal of a child pedophile, essentially, is so affecting that it is actually how we tend to see culturally people like that. Whether or not that's accurate is, a matter of your own objectivism, I suppose. But what I will say is, you could understand why kids would draw, and it's beautifully performed, because what Peter Lorre does is, he looks cute and chubby and cuddly. He looks like, almost like a cartoon character. You can understand why a kid, especially, and let's face it, these are more innocent times that movies made, would go with a guy like that. Adults were trustworthy. Speaks volumes. But another brilliant thing done in one scene is where Lorre is in the mirror and he's pulling faces. Now that might seem quite cartoonish to modern audiences, but you got to remember, filmmaking techniques, psychological underpinning. We didn't understand people as much as then as we did now. So when he's pulling the faces, I think it shows the inner turmoil of the guy, and it's brilliantly done. Again, spoiler, but when he is caught, there is a kangaroo court, and he basically throws what a lot of serial killers would use as their defense, right or wrong. Again, it's up to you, but he says, I'm compelled, I can't help myself. To a large extent, I'm not responsible for my actions. I know I've given you a few spoilers here, but this film is still worth seeing. And the last thing I want to talk about is one of the things that's very affecting is the kangaroo court, because whilst of course the event, Fritz Lang made this film, and you can't help but watch it in the context of the events that would happen in Germany, and frankly a few years later. In fact, I think Fritz Lang may have been commenting on what he thought was going to happen now. I'm of course talking about the Nazi state in Germany. The kangaroo court shows, the dichotomy between, there is some attempt to give the guy legal representation, and the crowd just scream for blood. All semblance of morality goes out the window. In fact, one of the final shots is just the crowd about to rush him, and that's an incredibly effective thing when you realise the power that the mob would have in Germany many years later. Is this film still worth seeing? Yes it is. Is it an affecting film? A lot of people might watch it and find it quaint. I actually found it incredibly psychologically disturbing because the reasons I've explained. Some of the police techniques are shown are a little simplistic. Some of the characters are caricatures, but you've got to see it as the era which it's made. You know, we're only just moving again, like I've said, from the silent movie era of, you know, grease paint and wild frantic hand movements, and it's for its time incredibly, in fact not even for its time, I'd say even now, in many respects it's an incredibly sophisticated piece of cinema. You shouldn't only watch this as an academic exercise or M's film I should watch because I'm into movies. It's incredibly effective, and as I said, I wish I'd watched it sooner. I'd give it a good 8 out of 10. I was surprised how much you enjoyed this movie, and I think you will too. Be interested to see what the other reviewers think later in the week. Keep watching, keep subscribing, and this is me saying see ya.